Well, welcome to another episode of the Downline podcast. My name is Jamie Trussell, privileged to serve on the Downline team and as lead pastor of Redeemer Dripping Springs in the Austin, Texas area. As always, if you would subscribe, give us 5 stars. That helps us get this content out to as many people as possible. And joined today by Cody Kimmel. We're going to talk a little bit about parenting and making disciples in the home and how to equip others to do so as well. And you're going to learn from one expert and one dad right here that keeps stumbling his way forward. So, Cody, thanks for joining us.
Well, it's good to know that I'm talking to the expert because I feel like the dad stumbling his way forward. Well, it's great to be on here, Jamie. Like you said, I'm Cody Kimmel. I am currently the executive director of an organization called Grace-Based Families. It is an organization that has been around for 40 some years now. My dad, Dr. Tim Kimmel, started it then, and I've since stepped into the role of president and executive director as of, I think, a little over a year ago. And I'm just doing that thing. I have 4 kids. We were talking about that a little bit before this. I have 4 kids. My oldest is 14. My youngest is 6, 3 boys, 1 little girl. And my wife and I have been married for over 16 years now. And it's great. And Jamie and I have, we've had some kind of crossover in the Texas world. I was a pastor there for a number of years and really love what Downline is doing and love just the opportunity to be a part of disciple making. I think that's such a great thing that is not just for professionals, and that's one thing that I love. It's something that we're all called to. So I'm excited to talk about it.
Yeah, you are, I would say, speaking our language, but I think that's probably Jesus' language there in the Great Commission as he gives that to all of us. And again, the point of the Downline podcast is we want to help men and women walk faithfully with Jesus while pouring their lives into others. And Cody, you mentioned grace-based families. For those that may not be familiar with kind of the mission statement of your ministry and organization, why don't you give us a little bit of a flyover of kind of what the kind of work y'all do and the kind of tools that are out there?
Definitely. So our mission statement is to help ordinary parents raise extraordinary kids. And we want to do that through connecting parents with kind of God's big, I guess, vision for what family is and what that looks like kind of in the trenches of everyday parenting. And we do that in a number of ways. We create a number of small group video studies that parents can walk through, both just either as a couple or with a group. So we work with a lot of churches to create small group materials for that. We have a podcast also called Blueprints that is trying to essentially do that, take what is God's big vision for families and what does that mean when it comes to disciplining our kids? What does that mean when it comes to navigating screen time? What does that mean when it comes to all the little things that seem to be both trivial and everything in the parenting moments? We do that. We create a number of print materials. My dad is an author and has written over, I want to say 15, 16 books on marriage and family over the years. We have a magazine publication that we put out twice a year that all is focused on parents and marriage, and we all have a section just for kids. So we're trying to do a lot of things. We're trying to connect in a lot of different ways through just the various ways that people receive information and grow in discipleship. And we also work alongside a lot of churches and go and help speak and help launch grace-based communities within churches. So we're doing a lot of things and hopefully do even more over the years.
Yeah, no, and I'm so thankful for the work that y'all are doing. As a parent myself, some of those little topics you ran down off the top of your head right there, they're pertinent to, I think, Shannon and I's every single day life. Yeah. But let's launch into one of them because, and you feel free to take this anywhere you want to go, but just on the idea of grace-based parenting, a parenting style that mirrors God's love, reflects his forgiveness, and displaces fear as a motivator. Most of what we're going to talk about is probably going to leave me feeling pretty bad about myself, honestly. Especially that piece of, I think fear as a motivator is pretty tempting.
Oh my gosh.
When you're dad, right? And so.
Oh yeah, no, totally. I mean, and it's one of those things where as a dad and even in leading this organization, I don't want to trivialize the world that we're living in. I think fear is a natural response to a lot of the things that we're facing. And so I think it makes sense that that's sometimes our gut reaction, both a fear of, what's happening at schools, what's happening with friend groups, what's happening online, all of those things. And then internally, the fear of failure, the fear of, what am I going to do if I screw up my kid? What happens when I lose my temper? Are they ever going to forgive me? There's constant fear there. And so on the one hand, there is a natural fear that we deal with.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the things we talk a lot about at Grace-Based Families is not so much ignoring the fear, but not allowing the fear to drive decision making. One of the things that we look at and we talk about a lot is mirroring our parenting style on the way that God parents kind of his kid. This is one of the revelations I think my dad had as he was developing this organization, is when you look through the Bible, God was a parent. God is described as a father, throughout the Bible. You see us described as his children. And I think when you pick up on that, on the one hand, God is not naive to the dangers of the world. God is not naive to sin or all of the different things that can drive us to fear. But what he does in the midst of that is he replaces that fear with the confidence of his presence, and that, he kind of takes the whole like fear of failure. I think because of grace, like that's kind of taken out of the thing. Like, yes, we're going to fail, but we don't need to be afraid of that failure ruining our lives and ruining our kids and ruining our, every day. He's fully aware that there are things out there in the world that are scary, but God is bigger than those things, and God is not surprised by those things. So there's a confidence and a faith that we can have as parents as we address those things. And so on the one hand, like, yeah, like fear is a real thing. I feel it every day, but praise God that we don't have to be consumed by it, because,
Yeah, for
as
sure.
he says, perfect love casts out fear and all of that. So
How do you, or how would you counsel someone like me that I genuinely feel like sometimes my kids are afraid of me?
yeah. Well, I will say there's probably a healthy fear of dad that is probably in there in the same way there's a healthy fear of God. There's a healthy fear of dad. But I think what you're getting at is kind of this worry that the actions that we're having are having an impact that's going to be irreparable, or kind of a presence that we have maybe in the home, maybe, because of stress, because of all of the different things where, we're not always our best selves at home. In fact, we're probably rarely our best selves at home. And, one of the things that I am so thankful for and that I have seen over and over again, particularly when we can kind of couple some of that stuff with kind of a regular practice of, hey, owning things when we mess up, seeking forgiveness when we mess up, is kids are so for our success. Like I think that's something that I come back to all the time. Like, our kids don't want to be afraid of us. Our kids don't want to linger in anger towards us. They are, even when they might not seem like it, even when they might in the moment be pushing back and stuff like that. I don't think there's anybody in the world who is more for our success than our kids. And that's something I come back to a lot, in just recognizing that as kind of this lie that I'll tell myself over and over again, that like the actions that I have, any mistakes that I have, any things that I do are going to just cause this emotion and this response in our kids that I don't think is actually there or true. I think that's something we're just making up in our heads that's keeping us from the joy that we can have in experiencing those relationships.
So how do, I guess, when somebody hears the phrase grace-based parenting, I think there's an extreme that comes in to their minds, maybe that means mom and dad are always saying everything's okay.
Right.
Right. Like,
totally.
So where does, kind of in that approach and mindset, maybe help explain it, how do you do grace-based parenting with the reality of disciplining our kids because we love them?
Totally. No, I love that question. I love talking about it because I think you're right. Like, initially that's where people go. It's like, oh, you just mean let your kids do whatever they want, which
Right.
if you're in our home, if we let our kids do whatever we want, our home would not exist anymore. It'd be falling over, like holes through every walls. Like it would be chaos, like
Pure chaos.
it would be pure chaos. No, I think some of that is a little bit of, I guess, missing what grace means in the Bible.
Hmm.
I think grace is God's commitment to our flourishing in a way that that role is on him and not on us. So,
Mm.
God has taken the role in our lives of saying, your development, you becoming who I want you to be, you flourishing in me, that's a commitment that I've made to you. And there's nothing you can do to make me stop doing that. Basically, you can't sin so much that I stop loving you and stop caring for you. You can't, let me down in a way. You can't be not good enough, anything like that. Like when you're with me, you're with me. And I that's my commitment to you. And I kind of think that that's maybe the better understanding of grace, because within that framework, discipline is a huge part of it. And if you look at the Bible, like, although God never abandoned his people, he certainly disciplined his people. He certainly did all of those things and not because he was shaming them, not because he was kind of rubbing their nose in their sin or anything like that. It's because he knew that without that discipline, he couldn't bring out their best,
Sure.
And I think that for me, the core of what grace-based is helping our kids become fully alive in God.
Mm.
It's doing what it takes, making that commitment to say, no matter what they do, no matter who they are, no matter how much they mess up, anything like that, it's making the commitment to help them become fully alive in God. And that pushes both against, I think, the legalism side and the license side that can kind of creep into that.
Yeah, which, I mean, when you say that, I think it's crystal clear. I think it's a biblical vision for parenting, a compelling vision for parenting. And then you get home from work and it's 6 o'clock and they're not doing what I asked them to the first time I asked them. They're whining. They don't want to eat. Whatever it is.
Oh, yeah.
And that biblical vision of parenting can go out of the window.
Oh, totally.
Yeah, pretty quickly.
Oh, yeah.
So
yeah.
what are some good, I don't know, maybe tools you have or offerings you have for parents to help get ahead of that
Totally.
reality?
Yeah. I mean, I guess the first thing that I would say is you're probably going to mess up and you're not going to be perfect. And that's the beauty of forgiveness and the beauty of kind of resetting and coming back to them later and saying, hey, during dinner time, I didn't handle that right. And I'm really sorry. So I would say that's probably the biggest tool in my toolbox is not getting better at this, just apologizing, when I mess up.
Yeah.
But like, I think one of the things that has helped me is anticipating my kids are probably not going to do what I want them to do, kind of anticipating those moments as much as I can. So, and it's amazing how even taking just a small moment, like if you're coming home from work, you're coming into a situation, maybe you work from home and you need to like go take a quick walk or whatever it is, to have that kind of reset moment and just kind of remembering like my kids are going to act like this. That doesn't mean that I have to act like that in response. And almost like this, like, and I don't say this in like a way that should make us feel like shame or guilt or pressure, but like remembering how often God has asked us to do so many things that we ignore and don't do the first time or the second time or the 85th time or whatever, and his response to us is always one of, sometimes firmness, sometimes discipline, but never this reactionary, chaotic anger or anything like that, And so if there's anything else apart from just apologizing when you mess up, it's anticipating the failure and prepping for how we respond to that. One of the things we talk about a lot is just, kids are really bad adults. Like they're really bad at being adults. And so much of my frustration towards them as a dad often comes down to they're not acting like an adult, like the way I would expect another adult to act. And I get mad because they're not really good adults. They're not, able to take really clear directions the first time that I give them, or they're not able to control their emotions when their sister hits them or their brother takes something from them, or they're not able to do that stuff. And some of it is just a reminder, like they're kids, they're really bad at being adults. And so it's almost reframing my expectation of saying, like, they're most likely this is not going to go well. Most likely dinner time is going to be chaos, and most likely bedtime, they're going to be shocked that they have to go to bed again, like they are every night. There's going to be these moments where there's always those things. And so kind of anticipating that and saying, like, it's not the end of the world. It doesn't mean you're a bad parent. It doesn't mean they're bad kids. It just means that they are kids, and that this is a part of raising them towards what they're going to be. My dad wrote a book called Raising Kids Who Turn Out Right. And that turnout right was such an important shift, because I think so much of our focus is raising kids who go through childhood right. And I think if that's our focus, then we're going to be constantly upset, constantly frustrated, constantly disappointed. And it's shaping it, like saying, you know what, they're probably not going to go through it right, but there are things that we can do to help them turn out right when we finally launch them.
Yeah, and maybe a couple of those components I know that y'all mentioned are like purpose, security, and inner peace. How do you, like, tangibly, or sorry, inner strength, I think it is, not inner peace,
Yeah.
but
Yeah, strength.
how
Peace probably comes with all of those too. So
sure.
yeah.
How are you, like, pragmatically building that into a child?
Yeah. Well, we can start with like that, like this need for that security that we talk about. So like kids need to know that they're secure. I think a really simple thing, discipline is where I think some of this negative, the way we discipline can kind of sometimes creep into a thing that communicates something we don't want to communicate to our kid, which is, if you mess up, somehow you're outside of the family, or you're outside of my love. Like, I don't think any parent would ever say, like, there's any contingencies on our love for our kids.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I'll try to do when I discipline is use those moments to call out the behavior. So, be really specific about the behavior or the incident or something like that, but reinforce, like, the beautiful vision of what it could be and what I know that to be true in their lives. So, like, a good example is, like, one of my sons says a mean thing to another son or something like that, and we have to pull him aside. One, I could say, man, you're a real mean person. Well, what do you think about that? Like, and that would communicate to them, my dad thinks I'm this thing, I'm this identity that somehow doesn't fit within his expectation of things. Or I could say, hey, I know you're not a mean person. I know you've got a really kind heart. I know you love your brother. What you said is not in line with that, and it's not okay. And if there's other discipline appropriate to that, you can say that. But it's kind of, that's an easy, I think, way to communicate in those moments of discipline. I think with purpose, like, one of my favorite things with my kids is getting to kind of study them and study what interests them. Like, I've got my oldest, who's really smart, really funny, really great musician, and I think has a really good wit that can disarm people. And so I'll tell them that. I'm like, hey, I think you are able to disarm people with your humor, with the way you carry people. I think a lot of people want to be your friend because of that. And I think that's a really good thing. I think God's going to use that someday. Or my second son, who's a super disciplined, super kind kid. My third son, who is this very, like, organized and like, loves to serve people. Like, he'll get up and literally make our coffee. And we're Pacific Northwesterners. So we do, we don't just pour coffee.
No,
we,
y'all
like,
are
grind the
snobs. You're
beans.
coffee snobs.
Yeah, no. And we're totally, like, I own it. Like, we grind the beans, we do the whole thing, and he knows how to do that. He wakes up early and does that for us. And our daughter, who could make friends with anybody, who's just this delight. I think, like, we don't have to, like, have this huge conversation all the time. We don't have to have this huge framework. It's like, when you recognize something uniquely good about your kid, is calling it out and saying, I think God made you that way, and I love that, and I think so little things like that, I think, are really easy to, like, we do that stuff all the time, and we get that opportunity, and it makes a huge difference in our kids.
Yeah, I think two things that I just admittedly struggle with as a parent, I honestly aren't actually rooted in my parenting. And what I mean by that is, I can tell if I'm not genuinely growing in the Lord or spending
Mm-hmm.
time with God or praying for my kids or asking God to grow me as a disciple. That is the number one place I think that the dark sides of that play
Oh
out is in
yeah.
my parenting,
Oh,
right?
totally.
Because it, when everything else seems out of control, there's a level I could get to as a parent that I guarantee you I can control my kids
Mm-hmm.
in the
Yeah.
sense of I can modify their behavior in a certain direction, and I may have paid a relational cost to get there, but
Oh
dadgummit,
yeah.
somebody's gonna listen to me. You know what I
Yep.
mean?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
And the more that I am not synced up with Christ, all those fruits of the spirit that God promises to give me
Oh
in
yeah.
full supply, my gentleness is out the window. I'm going to be harsh instead of gentle.
Yep.
I'm going to be irritable instead of patient. I'm going to be, and for whatever reason, parenting is like the primary playground for those sinful tendencies to come out.
Oh yeah. I mean, gosh, I relate to everything because, and I think that and I think this happens both with moms and dads. I think dads might have a stronger tendency towards using anger or using kind of our just size and presence to control chaotic situations. And I think we turn to that because it's easy, because
Mm-hmm.
it's, but, and like, if there's like a highly dangerous situation, you do what you need to do. But most of the time, that is not the case. That's not why we're resorting to that. Yeah. I mean, gosh, we are the outgrowth of the things that feed us,
Mm.
and so much. I think you're right. So much of our ability to parent our kids well, to love our wives well, to love our wives to love their husbands well. So much of that actually has nothing to do with those relationships and everything to do with what we're being fed by. Are we being fed by kind of the culture, the world, our own strength, our own inadequacies, fears, whatever you want to call it? Are we being filled by the Spirit on a regular basis? And on the one hand, of course, God promises His Spirit, His presence, and He's working in us and through us, even when we're not necessarily connected to Him. But gosh, it's a lot easier when we are, and it works a lot better when we are. And what I love about that is this doesn't mean like every morning we got to wake up at 3 a.m. and pray for 5 hours before, like,
Mm.
anything like that. It's incredible, I think, the work that God can do in even just little moments, that we can have with Him. For me, I'm a very kind of structured, disciplined person, so pretty much if it's not like a habit that fits into a place in the day, most likely it'll never happen. And
Mm.
so I've just kind of had to find these key moments throughout the day, that I know that I'm going to have available, that I just say, like, I might not be in the mood to talk to God or read about scripture. I might not even have anything to say when I show up in those moments. It might not be a
Mm.
super, impacting moment in that moment, but having those times set aside where I just know something can happen in my life and I'm available for it. Gosh, it can make a huge difference. Because I mean, what's funny to me is how when we react in those moments that you described, Jamie, in with the fruits of the Spirit, not only does it work better, actually, like it actually controls them better and
Mm.
has a better outcome.
That's a
But
good point.
it doesn't come with the relational cost that we oftentimes pay to do it the other way. And so there's even like you can make a practical argument, like this is actually just the better way to do it, period. Not,
Yeah.
you know, um, but yeah,
Almost like God designed it. Almost.
yeah, almost like this is how God made us to be.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
totally.
I'm curious because y'all do a lot of work and research in this area, but what would you say
Hmm.
common pitfalls are that parents fall into, right? So I can think of a couple. One is, even for me, can be parenting for the short term. Like when
Hmm.
I'm doing really well, I'm thinking about who do I want James, Gabe, Kyle, and Grady to be when they're 21?
Yep.
And what do I
Yep.
want our relationship to look like? Like I want when my kids are all out of college, I still want them to call me and want to talk to me. Well,
Yeah.
I think that starts now. I got to have a baseline.
100%.
And so but I don't want to pay. I don't want to make. So here's just a real life sad example for me is it's just me and my 8-year-old last weekend getting ready for a football game, and I could tell he was kind of shut down a little bit, and I was like, "Hey man, what's up?" And after finally forcing it out of him, he's like, "You're just always mad at me." And in my head, I'm literally my first reaction to that is, okay, nobody's always anything, and we don't need to do it. Thankfully, I didn't say that, right? Because he's
Yeah,
8.
yeah.
But I had to step back from that and go, he's picking up on something that he feels like is consistent. And
Yeah.
I think in God's kindness, he alerted me to it
Yeah.
because I think it's going to take a while for Gabe to recalibrate to, but if I kept going in whatever direction he was picking up on there, well, then when he is 21, it's going to look like a lot like
Oh,
he
yeah.
feels at 8, if that makes sense.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Well, there's, two things. One, just specifically to that scenario, one of the things we talk a lot about is giving kids the freedom to be candid. If you think about it, like because of our power relationship to our kids, we are candid with them all the time. We have no hesitation in speaking our mind and telling them when they're doing something wrong. But because of the power dynamic, kids need to almost be granted permission to say things like that to you. And my kids have said many things like that to me. And on the one hand, praise God that he did, praise God that he felt the freedom to be able to say something like that to you. And you respond in a way that was like, I'm hearing you, I'm paying attention to it now.
Yep.
And that, that's a huge thing. But kind of going back to that broader question of the short-term parenting, I mean, I think that is one of the biggest challenges facing parents. It's kind of underlying a lot of the other challenges that we face is, so much of our questions that we ask in the morning are like, okay, how am I going to get my kids to school on time? How am I going to get them to all their things in the, afternoon? How am I going to make sure they're eating right? How am I going to make sure they're, not hanging out with that friend that we don't like or whatever it is, and it's not that those things don't matter, but we can miss the forest for the trees in those moments. One of the things that we'll talk about a lot is thinking about like, what is our Thanksgiving dinner table going to look like 30 years from now, 40 years from now, even 20 years from now, when they're bringing they're showing up, maybe they're coming with their spouse, they've got their kids maybe with them, what kind of environment dynamic do we want to have then? What kind of people do we want them to be then? And I think even I think one thing that's a practical thing is picking like a specific image that you can kind of imagine in the future of what you want this to be, and allowing that to inform kind of decisions that you're making now. And then, I think even just the awareness that this is the long game. We're not playing a short game with our kids. And we don't stop being their parents even when they launch into adulthood. This is a relationship that hopefully will last our entire life. And the good news is, like I said before, I think our kids want our success. Our kids are probably more gracious to us than probably any other human being on the planet is. And so if we're coming at this thinking like, oh my gosh, I've really messed up our Thanksgiving meal, 20 years from now, like you've got 20 years to fix it. And I think that you can probably fix it a lot quicker than that. Like, I don't think it's going to take, I think you'd be surprised how little it'll take to recorrect when you have maybe moments where you're like, I haven't been doing this really well, or I haven't been responding, or I haven't even been thinking about it. I think that there's a pretty swift correction period there. I'm glad those lines of communication are open. Glad your 8-year-old was able to say something like that to you, and you responded in a way.
Well, sorry, I cut you off, but the challenge in that is, I think what you were about to say is, boy, I've got about a millisecond opportunity on how I'm going to respond to that.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
From my facial expression to my body language to my tone. Am I going to be defensive? Am I not going to be defensive? It goes really well when your 8-year-old tells you that and you're like, no, I'm not mad. It's like,
okay, exactly. You just prove his point.
Yeah. You reinforce his point right there.
Yeah.
But they do need a chance to be honest in a way that's not going to cost them something.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And that can be hard because you're not always going to want to hear their feedback.
No, totally. One of the things that my parents did growing up is we would have these things called "What's Your Beef Night," where we could each pick a meal that we'd want, and they would like order it. So if I wanted McDonald's and somebody else wanted a slice of pizza from Domino's or whatever, we could do that. So we get to pick whatever meal, and literally it was we went around the table and got to tell my parents in a respectful way things that they've been doing that maybe they could improve on or that have been hurting us or bothering us. And like it was weird, and it doesn't need to be something this formal, but like I think one of the ways that we can do that to where we're not doing it in a responsive moment is allowing some moments in a controlled environment where we're able to prep our response up front, basically to say we're not going to respond, even if we think that they're being unfair or unreasonable. We're not going to respond, and being able to say, okay, I appreciate you saying that. I'm so sorry that that's been something you've been dealing with from us, and I'm glad that we get to address that now. I think that's one way of doing it, but the other way, you're right. Like you have a split second, and that's when those moments with the Holy Spirit and having the Holy Spirit working in your life matter so much.
Oh my gosh.
All
right, I'm going to let you get out of here on this because I know I told you 30 minutes. We're a little bit over, but this, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit. Yeah. How do y'all handle screens?
Screens, great question. I would say we didn't handle them right the first time. I think we've done everything from, being like super controlling over every single little bit, and say screens are the worst things that's ever happened, all that stuff, to being way more relaxed than we probably should have. So just know that it's taken us a while, but I think one of the things is, first off, we try to communicate screens are amoral pieces of technology. They are not immoral. They are not moral. They're nothing. They are just a piece of technology that we can use for good or use for bad. So try to say early on, technology is just a tool that you can do bad things with, you can do good things with. And it's different for each age, and kind of what we allow and how. But what we try to do is be really specific and give clear guidelines up front and saying, like, during this time, for example, whether it's, like Nintendo Switch or something like that, like during this time, you've got this time, like you could do that, have fun with it. We've kind of pre-vetted everything that they're doing on there that they're able to have access to, so we can trust them with that and say, and that's what you're going to do. But before you do that, here's a list of things that you need to get taken care of, Like as long as you're doing this thing, and it can include like play outside for 2 hours, play other things for, things like that. So we do that with that. And then as far as, our older kids with screens, some of it is we use, and this is like a sponsored thing, but we use Gab wireless, which is, kind of a phone that has some things on it, but not full access to the internet, so that we can kind of help guide them in how to properly use those things. We try to put parameters on how they're able to access those, and when. We try to keep most screens in public places, as much as we can, with that. But the other thing is just teaching them. I think it's a hard issue more than it is a logistics issue, because the logistics are going to change every year. And just talking to them, say, like, be honest about the dangers and say, this is why this is harmful. This is why this is why we have these rules, or this is why we're wanting you to take this seriously. Provide like easy, non-shameful accountability when you can. And there's devices that even help with that, so they know that they're never alone on their screen, that like this is a group thing that we all have access to. And, but the bigger thing is just also saying, like, and there's also a ton of forgiveness and grace in the midst of that. Like, especially, our oldest is 14, our second oldest is 12. They're coming into their teenage years. Like, we can put all of the parameters in place, and they can figure out ways around all of them, if they wanted to. And so the bigger thing is having just a lot of open conversations about it, and saying, like, hey, what's going on? Hey, are you struggling with anything there? I want you to know you can talk to me about it. You're not going to be in trouble for talking to me and coming to me with something like that. We're going to work through it. We're going to pray through it. And I'm a resource for you. I think if we make screens the enemy, then we're always going to have conflict around it. So I think that was one of the things that we learned early on is don't make screens the enemy. They are a part of our lives. They're a part of our kids' lives. They're going to be a part of their lives when they launch, into the real world.
Sure.
And this is an opportunity for us to be a part of their development with screens, and help frame the conversation around screens, frame their understanding of it. And so that's how we handle screen time. It's different for each kid and different ranges, so it's a mix of really clear parameters around things and then a lot of honest, as much as we can, non-shameful conversations around some of the dangers on it.
Sure. Well, hey man, I've kept you over my promise, but I really, really appreciate you joining us. And I think it's going to be really helpful
This is great,
for our
Jamie.
folks.
Yeah, Jamie. Well, I appreciate you guys and what you're doing, and it was great being on here.
All right, man. Hopefully we'll connect again soon.